Hi everyone, just again, that's 12 o'clock. We'll give stragglers a couple more minutes to join in. There should be a fair few more people joining. So fingers crossed, we'll get started in 2 minutes. So I think actually let's get going, giving people time to join. There should be more people coming in over the course of the next few minutes. But I'd like to say welcome to Stefan and Christina. Thanks for taking the time to join us here today to talk about space marketing. Stefan, you've been a friend for a few years, and it's great to have you to talk about it. And Christina, new, but been friends with Space Forge for quite a while. First of all, I'd love to both ask you, maybe Christina, you can start how you found your way to marketing in the space world, especially considering, as I understand it, you both have engineering degrees, so it's a little bit of a tangent. So Christina, yeah, how did you find yourself working in marketing at a space startup like Space Forge?
Yeah, of course. First, can I say that it's great to be here. I'm really excited to be speaking with everyone today, and very excited to get into the discussion with Stefan. But yeah, so how I found my way into marketing, it's a bit convoluted, but I actually founded the Edinburgh Women's Space Conference. We had our first conference back in March of 2020, 2021. The years are all getting a little bit mixed up. But kind of throughout the course of that process, I was helping with a lot of the marketing. And I had met Josh and Andy, so the two co-founders of SpaceForge, at the National Student Space Conference in March of 2020, so just before everything got shut down. And so I was looking at different internships kind of for after I graduated, because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to go into. Yes, I do have a mechanical engineering background, so I was in the middle of trying to do fluid mechanics exams. And then I was kind of like, oh, this kind of business side of things, marketing side of things of space is quite interesting. And, it's something very niche. And I was very engaged with it with the Women in Space Conference. And so I actually was looking through space placements in industry, so the SPIN program. I just saw a few different things coming up. So there were lots of engineering ones, but then the ones that really stuck out to me were the more business ones, marketing ones. And I thought, with my kind of background with the Women in Space Conference, we ended up getting lots of attendees from all over the world. And I was like, let's just give it a shot and see what ends up happening, because it just sounded really great. Brand building, it was a fairly new startup, there wasn't really much of a social media presence or anything. So I was like, this will be a really interesting challenge. And I found my way onto that scheme. Josh and Andy liked me, fortunately. And then from there, I kind of progressed from marketing intern to full-time business development and marketing officer. So, yeah, that's been my story.
Yeah, so nice that you started with doing something voluntary to kind of get a flavor for what it felt like and then moving into it. Was it same for you, Stefan? Did you have an experience of working in marketing before joining Valispace as the head of marketing, or was it just jumping on a punt?
It was definitely jumping in deep waters. On my end, I come from a mechanical engineering degree, and then I worked in 3D printing for a while, and then I discovered space because I saw that someone was trying to 3D print a lunar base on the moon, and I got really excited. I found out that ESA was working on that. I found out the teams that were working on that. I ended up doing a second master's in space engineering at the time in the Netherlands. And at the same time, I started discovering the whole entrepreneurial world, and the whole startup scene was basically starting to boom in 2013, 14 across Europe. So I started getting more involved, and in the Netherlands, I joined the local incubator of my university. I started going to a ton of hackathons, space startup weekends, and others. in the beginning as participant, and over time actually as mentor and co-organizer, because I realized that for me it was always about learning how to go from an initial idea to something that someone at the end of the chain can actually get value from, right? And during my time at ESA, I did research on 3D printing, on material sciences, radiation shielding, all sorts of engineering topics. And what I found often is that I found myself in a typical scenario in which I was a communicator. I was taking an enormous amount of complicated information and I was translating this into something that people can understand and do something with. Which was also very a good place to do that, which was at the European Astronaut Center, where astronaut training is exactly that, right? Like, how do you go from hundreds of hours of engineering content and boil it down to a 5 or 10 or 20-hour crash course for astronauts? So it was a very inspiring environment. And after my time there, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do exactly. There was a more scientific route, there was more engineering route, there was the startup route. And I felt like once and for all, I wanted to actually learn what it meant hands-on to build a company. I was a little risk averse to start something of my own. And I got connected with Valispace at the time. And I saw they were looking for someone in marketing, and I didn't know anything about marketing. But I did have a very large network in the space industry, and the role itself sounded quite interesting. And in the beginning, we didn't actually need marketing. We actually needed to learn how to sell. We needed to learn how to do customer success. And only, I would say, as of about a year ago, when the team scaled, there's been sufficient time and space to actually scale marketing efforts. So it's been quite a bit of a journey, but it has been really helpful to see the whole cycle from finding out who your customer is, finding out how you speak to them, finding out how you actually sell to them, how you make them successful. And now we can scale up that part of
And I guess in my head, I mean, storytelling is always around, you have to know what story you're telling, but then you also have to be able to tell the story right. And I guess it sounds to from both of you, perhaps it's the understanding of engineering, especially when space is so technical. You really need to actually be able to get to grips with what's happening before you're able to communicate it. So in what ways do you think coming from an engineering background has been a strength, or has it been a weakness at all in some places? Obviously, you haven't come with a master's in marketing that some people might have.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting question, just because my engineering background has definitely helped me. So I was I think I was the first person to join the business team, really. And so I was working directly with our CEO, Josh, who comes from a politics background. So he's like, oh, this is really great. He worked at Thales before, but yeah, I think it was good to have me come in and work with our office manager, who had no space background or whatsoever. And so we were working on building up, Space Forge's credibility, and just, yeah, I feel like Space Forge wasn't really properly in the news until just a few months ago when we announced major funding rounds. It all sounded really far away. And so I think having that technical background really helped, because we have such a large team of engineers. Most of us are engineers. And so it really helped for me to be able to kind of communicate with them, figure out what was going on, and then translate that to graphics, social media campaigns, stuff like that, and figure out how to kind of bridge that gap. And so, yeah, I think my engineering background definitely helped me in that way. I'm sure, Stefan, you can agree with that.
Absolutely. We have similar patterns, I think. I'm also the first person to join the business team on our end. And in the beginning, it was a lot of learning how to speak with systems engineers. What do they really need? And we know that we built something that's specifically for space systems engineers. And being systems engineers ourselves, that made it very easy to connect, right? So we knew what the problems were, and we knew how we could solve them. That being said, the moment we start speaking with other people that are outside of the specific space or outside of our industry, because the problems that we're solving are not just for space, the engineering background helps, because you can think in systems, you can think in, you can empathize better, essentially, with the end users. But for example, to scale an organization and its processes and have large-scale marketing campaigns, these are types of topics that I personally had no idea about. So it was a lot of learning. I think there was a lot of engineering bias in our team for a long time in the beginning, where we thought that we need to have people with a technical background to do certain things, whereas that was actually a big pitfall, because we saw over time that as soon as we have set up or learned a few things, that we should hire the right people in the sales team, in the marketing team, the customer success team, with different mindsets as well. So I think in that respect, it's been great to diversify and to create an extremely good, strong, complementary team with different skills.
And there's something there around language, isn't there? Right. So it sounds like when you got started, it was all around how do you communicate internally, but then externally, if that's one of your customer niches. But then as you get successful there, you suddenly need to learn new languages in order to speak to your customers. And I know, Christina, SpaceForge, you guys are looking at quite a wide variety. Is that something that you've had to think about, is different languages that you need to speak in order to communicate with different customers?
So I've largely been involved on the kind of business writing kind of side of things just now, and we have kind of a small pool of customers just now because we're trying to improve our technology. So the focus has been kind of on speaking to those potential customers and figuring out how we can kind of work together to both suit our needs. So yeah, I think the engineering background, going back to that, has really helped because I can kind of understand what's going on with our payload, and I can kind of join in on those meetings with the other engineers and kind of know what's going on. But because even though SpaceForge is a space company, our applications can basically be used in industries just around the world. And so, we're speaking with people from all sorts of industries, backgrounds, a lot of them business folks as well. So, the business people will come to us and say, we're interested in doing this, but they don't quite have the technical engineering background. So it's been quite helpful in meetings to kind of ask, like the pointed questions, about what exactly they're looking for, and get them to kind of feedback to their engineering teams and get back to us. So yeah, I definitely think language. Yeah, I think just being able to quickly understand information and just kind of okay, this is what they're saying, just yeah, kind of think about it for a bit and then quickly get back to any potential customers has been very, very useful.
Yeah. And then I think what's interesting is some of the differences between Valispace and SpaceForge, because as you say, I think SpaceForge is a little bit earlier on, and it sounds like a lot of the work that you started and you thinking about were around building credibility, building the brand. Whereas for you, Stefan, it feels like, you've maybe gone through that stage or onto the next one of, how do we scale up customer acquisition? So I think it's interesting to think about marketing in stages or phases, especially for space startups. And then thinking about, when you joined, I think it was a fair few years ago, Stefan, do you think there's been any major steps that you've had to take in how you think about marketing or how marketing has evolved at Valispace?
So there's two parts to this. So one is on the internal side, what's going on for me and my personal growth. And there's the company and the needs of the company. I think they're definitely correlated. Because the limiting factor is always going to be what I would be able to produce, and is there enough headspace in an organization to actually spend and expand certain parts of the organization? So I think the different stages that we have gone through as an organization was, first of all, landing the first customer. That was a big one, because then you know who you can ask questions to, right? Like someone actually opened their wallet, put money on the table, and they said, yes, this is valuable. So this is a real validation. Great. Then you start studying that. And then you start thinking, okay, who are the next 5 or the next 10 people that you could go after? So that is, let's say, within the vertical of what we're very used to, which is our main use cases in space to build hardware. Then there's a part which is how do we define adjacent value propositions? So for example, some of the first parts of Valispace were a simple calculation engine to define mass and power budgets.
I'm going to pretend I know what that means. I have no idea what that means, but okay, sure.
So essentially, we found out that people actually need to start off with requirements engineering before they can go there. So there needed to be some part of the tool that essentially takes care of that. So now we have a fully fledged requirements engineering module. And as you can see, basically, to become, our mission is to empower engineers so they can build the hardware of tomorrow. In the beginning, there was, let's say, a little bit of a discrepancy between what we were going for and what people actually needed. So bridging that gap was definitely one of the first steps. The second step was, once there is that fit, building up, right, finding different use cases. But then there's also leaving the space industry and looking at who else has this problem and how else is this problem being solved of collaboration across engineering departments in different industries. And since then, we entered automotive, we entered aeronautics, we entered the energy industry, the medical industry. And what you just said earlier about different languages that you should speak, I would say that the most challenging one for me personally was the medical industry, and we still don't have, say, any great traction there. But essentially the same problems exist. Like, how do you let an engineer from the design team work together with the QA engineer who has to do final qualification and testing on this? Where do the data reside? How does it work? How does certification work of medical devices? They're very similar patterns, but learning how to speak that language is definitely a crucial part. And the stage that we're in right now, I would call this, let's say, the third chapter, at least for me. We're now actually ready to have a more broad digital presence. So we're really looking at, okay, how do we really start scaling this up? Because before you can scale, you need to be really, really sure of what you're doing. Because there's only so many times where you can build, say, the trust and the brand awareness. It hinges on making sure that you're actually good at what you're doing. So like now we're entering that stage in which we can start scaling up that part of the operation as well.
And then to kind of drill into going back a little bit, especially for those startups that are maybe at an earlier place of finding those first customers, you know, what were some of the skills or approaches or things that you thought about to help identify those customers, you know, that first paying customer, or once you've got that first paying customer, the next couple, from a marketing lens or a communication lens, anything that you think was valuable from the time then?
So the first thing that came to mind for me is just asking good questions. By asking good or powerful question that people may have not reflected upon sufficiently, because there's a lot of assumptions, right? Like, this is how you work, and this is how you will work for the next 5 or 10 years. And you ask a question and you make people reflect on that by themselves, and they realize that this is maybe space they can open up and rethink. That's how you can really provide value. It's very much a consulting approach, right? It's you oversee how is it today, because we're in the business of essentially digitizing and digitizing engineering process. And a lot of this is very rigid, right? There's regulations on how you should do certain things. There's people who come with their own experience that have been doing this for 5 or 10 or 20 years. There's people who simply don't want to change anything because it works, right? And it's really difficult to basically go through all of these walls, especially as a young organization. By now, Valispace is on the market for nearly 6 years, so we have a bit more credibility. But if you take this back 3 years ago when I joined, it's really about asking the right questions, and it's really about connecting with people on a level which is beyond purely saying, yes, here's a tool and it's going to solve your problems. No, we are a team. We're a team of passionate people, and we are really passionate about your problem. We're going to try and help you get there, because any organization that tries to scale their engineering process long term, as companies also grow, actually is looking for these kinds of solutions. They're just, it's like we're selling vitamins and not aspirins, and it's much harder to sell that than aspirin. So having a good way to open up these conversations, I would say, is one of the most important skills, especially early stage.
I definitely echo that sentiment. That is so true. I think asking the right questions and really like kind of to lead up to that, making sure that you really understand the brand and your vision. And when I first started my internship at Spaceforge, I just remember I spent so much time, you know, reading everything I could on our different sites, asking so many questions, and just really understanding the why behind the business, because then I think that really sets you up well for marketing, because then you know, when people come up to you and they're like, you know, why are you doing this? Why is this important? How can we really like kind of benefit from this? You have that deep understanding, and then you're able to ask the right questions and get those discussions going.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting to me is, you know, I think it's maybe the differences in the lead times here as well between Spaceforge and Valispace. I think Valispace, you could probably buy it, download it, and start using it tomorrow. I imagine Spaceforge, it's slightly longer lead times. So when Stefan was talking about, you know, finding those first customers and getting them engaged, is that something that resonates with your experience, Christina, or is there other things that Spaceforge is working on in the marketing and customer acquisition space that is new to what Stefan was speaking about?
Yeah, so I think we are still, as you said before, in our early stages. And, I think I foresee kind of some of Stefan's points being some of the future things that we're going to be dealing with our marketing department, especially as we expand. But a lot of our marketing has really been around brand building and, creating, like I said before, going back to that point of credibility, because, in space manufacturing sounds really far-fetched. And up until a few months ago, everyone was kind of like, I don't really know if that's going to take off. And now, it's in the national space strategy, which is quite exciting. So yeah, we've kind of gone at marketing in different ways and through lots of trial and error, I'd say. There have been little things that we've done trying to reach out to the audience, and then also kind of sharing information that we're open to customers. There's just, marketing kind of on all different fronts, and just kind of seeing what sticks, what works, and what actually, brings us the best leads, and also just brings awareness of this really fascinating, incredible sector that can do so many things for people on Earth.
I have a question, Christina, because brand building is something is becoming more, let's say, on top of our agenda, because it's something we've not really invested that much time and effort in so far. I wonder which types of activities specifically you've been doing when it comes to brand building.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We've done a few campaigns just featuring the people at Space Forge and just showing the people behind, just not being like in space manufacturing, this is what it is. We're showing the people working on the different tools and kind of highlighted their roles and how they're all fitting into our big vision. And we also do quite a few different interviews with people. So we actively try to seek out, just any kind of messages we can use to spread the word of in-space manufacturing. We want to, our online persona is quite approachable, friendly, chatty. And so we do a lot of, we find nearly all, I think, of our job applicants on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn's been a huge tool for us, and just kind of starting that conversation, just lots of interactive things, having other people, ministers and such, and people from, the Ministry of Defense speaking about, Space Forge and what we're doing. And so just really getting the conversation started around in-space manufacturing as a field. And then once people are kind of hooked in by that, just saying, this is what Space Forge can offer and stuff like that. But yeah, it's really interesting actually speaking to you today, just because, you very much have a tool that can be used now, whereas us, it's a little bit more long-term. We're like, oh, you'll see the effects in the next few months, in the next few years and stuff. So
yeah, it's super interesting to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Stefan, after you.
It's super interesting to hear, because it seems indeed that we're doing like almost reverse roles, in the sense that in our case, we really want to basically put it to as quickly as we could in the end user's hands, so we can get feedback on it, right? Because also, to give you an idea, every 2 weeks people get an update. Well, you may know this, Christina, because actually SpaceForge is one of our customers, which I'm very happy about. Every 2 weeks on average, people get small updates, right? So in our case, it was all about giving us as quickly as we can in the hands of real users, so we can get end user feedback. But then defining the point where we should actually start these kinds of more high-level conversations, getting engaged in different types of programs, and in our case, around digitization in the engineering space. Somehow, all these efforts which we did have in the last few years didn't really lead to much, I would say, because it's a very crowded space. And there's a lot of almost trauma there of like people with the promised land already from like 30 years ago or 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Different organizations have so much resistance to actually talking about this topic. And especially there's large tool vendors that are pushing their agendas for decades already. And for us, it just seemed like a very difficult space to enter with relatively, let's say, limited resources and headspace. So we took a very pragmatic approach. But now is also the time for us to enter that, let's say, brand building stage. Very likely. So
I think there's something really interesting as well. Is it sounds, Stefan, like you didn't really need to educate people on the value of the opportunity, right? Whereas I think with SpaceForge, it's more around, as you stated, it's only in the past couple of months that folk have been like, oh, wow, this is something that could be valuable for me. Do you think that's accurate? I mean, when I imagine it's easier to find a customer when people know that there's a problem there, whereas I imagine with SpaceForge, it's the lack of awareness. So there's almost a brand and awareness building that SpaceForge had to do, that Valispace, you could almost just start getting straight to the customer acquisition. Is that accurate?
Not entirely, because the problem is quite complicated and people don't assume it to be solvable. And for the early adopters and the innovators, yes, it's absolutely true. We can just go ahead and, for example, Spaceport is a great idea, a great example. Great idea too. I'm a huge fan of in-space manufacturing. For those of you who know me in the audience, 3D printing in space has always been my go-to. But basically, besides the innovate, that's only a very small segment of our target audience. Everyone else outside of it, let's just say an average engineering organization that pushes, I don't know, some subsystem part in automotive, they just keep working and they don't assume that there's a better solution to their processes. So oftentimes the largest part of our job is actually educating. And it's almost a consulting approach in which we enter the organization, we try and understand what they're really trying to achieve. And the tool is just, the tool part is clear. But then making sure that, because there's also that many different personas, right? There's, for example, a systems engineer, there's a project manager, there's a design engineer, there's someone who's in the engineering process side, there's someone on the IT side, there's someone on the innovation department. And if you think of all these different types of people, we had to learn how to educate every single one of these. So yes, there are, of course, innovative, great organizations that we can just instantly start working with. They're typically startups or early scale-ups. But on the enterprise side, especially, it takes many, many months, oftentimes with lead times, with sales cycles of half a year, 1 year, 2 years. We've only been on the market for 6 years, so I can't give you many data on that front. But the only thing I can say is that it requires a lot of effort on the educational side.
I just have a quick question. I'm just thinking, so, do people take a look at you in the space sector and go, okay, we'll give this a try? And other sectors, do they sometimes come in and go, oh, that's kind of geared towards space, that's not really us? Have you had that?
Definitely. And it's been one of our challenges as well. In the beginning, that was okay, because that's our initial target market. And that's where we came from, is the one we understood best. That being said, it's also a relatively small market in comparison to some of the more traditional, larger markets that we could address. So oftentimes it did happen, especially with our previous website. Like now it's a little better already. And of course, there's much room for improvement. But simply having the right, let's say, graphic, which represents something that people can relate to, the right specific explanation around the use case with the lingo that they're used to, a quote of an organization, their industry, already changes everything. So we did have to make an active effort to try and diversify in that space as well. So is that something that you have as well?
Yeah, so, people kind of see us and they see, in space, and they kind of assume, oh, well, there's, we're on an industry, let's just say heavy machinery or something, oh, we're on Earth, we can't really use space for anything that's not going to be useful. And so, we found ourselves at quite a few space events, and it's really great to kind of raise awareness in the space community, but we've been realizing, we really need to shift our marketing towards, and also, I guess, our event planning and such, to attend more broad events and kind of bring them the benefits of space. So yeah, I was just curious to hear
The great question from the audience that I want to chime in on, because obviously there's customer acquisition, but one of the most important elements of any space startup, or any startup really, is making sure you've got enough runway, and that means investors. The question is, how much do you think marketing strategy there is to support raising investor awareness? And have either of you consciously been working on that? And I guess that's as much around PR as it is around marketing, and perhaps that's a different stream that we could talk about. And any successes or any things that you put effort into that didn't pay off from a building investor awareness perspective?
So in my case, I haven't been particularly involved in that. My CEO, Marco, he's been very successful, I think, in maintaining and building relationships with investors from the get-go. I joined right after seed funding, after Valispace received seed funding. So I haven't been very involved, mostly because it does take up quite a bit of headspace. And the goal was always for me to stay more on the ground, actually doing the work. And in a lot of ways, we typically don't do any specific effort to raise awareness amongst investors on the marketing side, on the company side. It's more like we believe in what we already do should be sufficient for people to gain an idea of who we are. It shouldn't be specifically targeting investors. That being said, around investments, we have published an article, for example, in TechCrunch, where we shared how this investment will help us enter new industries, new markets. Specifically, the medical one was an interesting example because that was exactly around the beginning of COVID, where it basically helped engineers collaboratively design open source ventilators. So that was a good way for us to learn very quickly of what it takes for example, tens or hundreds of engineers to work together to bring a piece of hardware through certification processes. So I know that answers the question, but in our case, there's very, very little marketing strategy specifically to support raising investor awareness.
Whereas for us, it's slightly different. So yeah, I'm not directly involved with investor relations, and that's Josh. So a lot of the stuff happens behind closed doors. But I'll give you a little bit of a timeline. So I think it would have been last July, so July 2021, and we announced our CSTS contract. So that's one of the European Space Agency's boost fundings. And so that was really big news for us. That was a significant amount of funding. It showed that ESA was supporting us, and that was great. And so we kind of used that opportunity to show that we were legitimate, we were here for good, and here to stay basically on the world stage. And so we actually published some quotes from various people who were supporting us. I'm trying to think of a few. Some people from the UK Space Agency. We had the Development Bank of Wales. So we got quotes from them and posted them on our social media. And so this was kind of in the early stages of our social media kicking off. And so I think from there, some of those posts gained traction. We had quite a few. And so I think that was kind of a good lesson in trying to figure out the right balance between how much information to share. If there's too much of the same content, customers or potential investors can be like, oh, that's a lot of information coming at us. But at the same time, it showed these people in important roles, essentially vouching for what we were doing. And from there, we've also featured some of our stakeholders in a few videos. And so that's really helped with investor awareness, because they go, oh, this big agency is showcasing and actively supporting what Spaceforge is doing. Great. That means, they're more likely to kind of open a dialogue with us. And instead of Josh going out and kind of going, okay, investors, like I need to find you, and kind of scoping them out and figuring out who would be interested, we're now having people come to us and saying, I want to invest in you. And so that's been quite an interesting development.
Yeah, again, I think it's super interesting, just the different timelines and almost the lead times involved as a difference between Valispace and Spaceforge. Because I think, and again, this is all my perspective, but it feels like Spaceforge, there's a lot more of awareness and brand building early on, again, because it's much longer lead times, the enterprise lead times that you were talking about, Stefan. But it looks like you've done a pretty good job of, especially government relations. I've seen a lot of stuff that's come out about, I think Paul Bate was there, and then the opening as well. And you had a lot of interesting people there. I think the MOD have arrived at some point as well. And, you've come up in Parliament, and there's some really interesting things that have been going on from the government perspective. Has that all been reactive, or has that been you driving in that direction for a specific reason to kind of build on what was going on with CSTS?
So when I started as an intern, our CEO, Josh, he was kind of handling all everything. So kind of like a little bit of marketing, business, investor relations, and also the government affairs stuff. And so over the course of my internship, I'm very keen. I'm very interested in, what's going on in government. I knew that there were some debates going on last year around space, and I really wanted to get Spaceforge's voice at the table, and Josh was keen on that as well. But he didn't quite have the time because he was in the middle of, we announced our seed funding round at the end of last year, and so Josh was very busy with that. And so what came through that dialogue was, we need a government affairs and regulatory affairs and government person in place to kind of properly arrange this, because even though I was interested in that, and as a result, I was trying to kind of focus our social media around that as well. So I was, tuning into the debates in the House of Commons and the discussions there and live tweeting things, just because I found that interesting and I thought I really wanted to get us involved there. And so yeah, now we have a government affairs officer and who's engaging with all these different stakeholders, different government departments. And so I'd say that I don't think we quite expected it to pick up quite as quickly as it did. Now we have all these different departments coming to us as well, and people are very keen to engage with us and discuss things with us. And so yeah, it's kind of been a little bit reactive, but yeah, we definitely wanted to get involved in Parliament in the big debates and discussions around the space sector in the UK, especially with the national space strategy coming out at the end of last year. We definitely wanted to make sure that in-space manufacturing was on that. And yeah, so it was kind of firing on all different fronts. I feel like that's kind of our motto at Spaceport. Everyone's just kind of trying out different things all the time and just getting engaged in different activities.
And then Stefan, I think it's, a lot of the work that Valispace does, I've noticed, seems to be around kind of championing the partners and the teams that you're working with. I guess it might be interesting to see, have you got any perspective on some of the teams that you're working with? Because again, it feels like there's a hardware software divide here, or not divide. I don't want to make binaries. But is that something that you've noticed? Is some of the teams that you're working with have to think a little bit longer term as opposed to getting straight to customer acquisition? And does that impact their marketing at all?
I think if I understand your question correctly, you're asking about marketing activities across software companies versus hardware companies? Yeah.
Because I think you're in a unique position, right? Doing marketing as a software company, but working with a lot of hardware companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting here? I don't think it's about creating a division. I think it's rather everything we do is very complementary. We ourselves can rarely show something cool. Okay, so this is the first step. We're not building hardware. This is not very visual. It's not very tangible. Like, it's not something you go to, I don't know, after working hours, go with your friends for a drink and then you talk about engineering processes and how cool they look. Right.
So speak for yourself, man.
It's a very dry space in a lot of ways. So trying to make this a bit more tangible, we're now seeing that we need to engage much more with our customers to basically share how the value for them is actually appearing. So the moment we start getting like quotes out from our customers, they're saying like, we saved 20% of our project cost in this project because we use Valispace. It's like, wow, this is amazing. And then we keep getting like these types of quotes. And then at some point we're also like, okay, we should actually showcase how we help our customers get more successful. And they have amazing things to show, right? We've had customers ranging from building hardware in space. For example, ClearSpace, we're now making a video with them, which I hope I can share very soon with the world. We've had customers building nuclear fusion reactors. We've had like all sorts of complicated hardware, which looks and feels really good, because think about where the world is going, right? Think about, especially right now, sustainability is becoming more and more of an open topic in a lot of agendas. And being able to share how we actually help people get there, if you can bring your products to life faster to market, faster to their end users, if we can help people bring super efficient aircraft faster to market, electric or hydrogen driven, or just with a 10% consumption rate than today, these are great successes. It's just a bit harder to measure because in a way we're like one step behind, right? We are helping others bring that to market faster. Our software itself at the end of the day is just a tool, right? It's about what you do with the tool, how you use it, how you bring teams together, how they actually bring their products to life faster. So I think there is a divide in the sense that I receive Monday.com paid advertisements every day, every time I open YouTube. And I think the big challenge that we see today is that there's more and more digital products, and they're super easy to scale in a lot of ways because the channels have been created. That being said, to have a really meaningful brand that's really taking a thought leadership stance and how the world 5 or 10 years from now should look like, that takes a lot of active work. It's not just about throwing the money at it. It's not just about hiring all the people. It's really about taking a stance, having a vision, and then building towards it. And that somehow, I think, is always going to be the same, whether it's hardware or software, because the problems you're solving are still human problems, right? And whether you're coming up with a hardware solution or a software solution, I don't think is necessarily the question. Maybe empowering engineers can also look like you're building the best tool case that in a way finds the tools back at the end of the day and puts them nicely back in the workshop and everyone can work faster, right? So there's a lot of different ways of how you can achieve that vision.
Yeah.
So it's broader than just that.
It's making it emotional as well. And I think what's interesting is what you're talking about is, Valispace as an enabler of great things, right? And I think that's something that's really true for SpaceForge as well, right, Christina?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We're kind of making products that are impossible to kind of create on Earth to the same extent as they can be in space. And so we're making much more efficient products in space and returning them back down to Earth for the benefit of various industries. And I'm happy to go into a little bit of the spiel around that, but it's just certain things in microgravity in the space environment just make it more conducive to manufacturing processes, and as a result you can make different. I'm not supposed to actually really discuss, this is actually one of the things that I wanted to touch on just about SpaceForge, but I'm not allowed to discuss some of the use cases just now. We're launching a new website where you'll be able to see them soon. But yeah, so we've been very tight-lipped around that, and that kind of, I guess, raises a different part of marketing. How do you market something when you can't really speak about the end?
That's a great question. Yeah. How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
You kind of teed yourself up for that one, I'm not gonna lie.
So what we've really been doing is just saying, highlighting previous in-space manufacturing efforts and just showing that with SpaceForge, we're creating a dedicated platform rather than just launching, small experiments into space that can't really be used on a wide basis, and just saying, this has been created in space before, such as fiber optic cables that are just much more efficient, last for longer, thereby driving down energy costs and also just increasing the efficiency and lifespan, so minimizing waste. And just saying, this was done on such a small scale and it took so long because of this, this, and this. And then just saying, with SpaceForge, we can create kind of similar things, maybe including fiber optic cables and stuff, and just saying we can create it on a much larger basis that can kind of actually make a dent in different industries.
Kind of leading people to believe what they want to believe, and then you can. It's a little bit more elegant, isn't it? And then kind of zooming out a little bit. I think it'd be interesting to hear from you, Christina, especially from you, Stefan, thinking about strategic narrative, and kind of the story that you tell. Do you think the story that SpaceForge tells has changed in the past, the past year you've been involved, and for you, Stefan, as well? How has that changed, and what have been the learnings that unlocked that change?
At SpaceForge, there are definitely a few different things. We've used microgravity as a service, and that was a really big part of our CSTS contract, and also just making space work for humanity. That's kind of been a new slogan. At the heart of it, I think the message has very much remained the same, but we've been, we're quite close with our audiences on social media. We regularly engage with them and stuff. And so through that, we've been able to pick up what people are interested in, what resonates the most with the audiences, because I think at SpaceForge as a team, all of us really believe in the vision and what's going to happen, and so we're kind of happy to kind of use any real slogan, because we believe in the vision and everything so much, and it all kind of stems from that central idea of using space for humanity, essentially. And so it's really been about discussing with maybe investors, our potential customers, and also just our audiences on social media, and getting their feedback on what they see as beneficial at SpaceForge, kind of taking that back, having internal discussions, and then kind of using that to kind of shape our strategy going forward. So yeah, at the heart of it, I think it's the same kind of overall vision, but definitely our communication has kind of changed over the past few months as we kind of figure out more about who we are and what we want to say online.
What about you, Stefan?
I think in our case, it's largely remained the same as well. From a underlying story perspective, but the way it's projected onto the world,
Mhm.
we've had to learn how to speak less engineering, to say it like that, and more human speak. So one of the big efforts that we did about a year and a half ago was to really understand that narrative and that story we're trying to tell. And we're working with someone from outside the space industry, and she was just asking us really good questions. And she came up with, let's say, our enterprise story. How do we explain this to someone who's actually not technical, but he's a decision maker, right? And these types of, let's say, that's part of the narrative. It's widening. If your narrative is, for example, system engineer to system engineer, we have a shared language. But then anything above that, outside of that, below it, and so forth, like we needed to expand our range in which we can communicate. And in that respect, I think we're actively about to improve a lot. It's something that we found very difficult, particularly sometimes we would enter a conversation with a CEO or a program manager who has nothing to do with the actual technical engineering process, and trying to understand what are their pain points, what are their reasons to care, and what are their typical objections, and how do we address that. So these are the types of elements to a narrative that were new to us. So we had to learn as we went. But that being said, let's say the taglines have typically been staying the same. Like our mission will always be to empower engineers, but now it's engineers plus plus, because it's also the people that work with the engineers, right? It's not just about convincing the engineers, it's about convincing his boss, and maybe his boss's boss, and maybe the IT department that's in charge of all the tools and processes across an organization. So it very much depends on the different types of organizations we work with. I would say that the cycle looks very different, whether it's a young organization or an organization like Airbus or BMW that we're working with and have been on the market for decades.
I think it's really great to kind of show, that you're listening to the people that are really closely involved with your organization, you know, if you're kind of taking on board what they're saying and what they find important. And I think that's just a sign of a great team, and just shows that, you know, companies, you know, we're listening to our customers and investors and stuff like that. So yeah, I really resonated with what you were saying there.
And in that sense, it also gives us an opportunity to really grow that narrative according to what's really needed. Because on one hand, of course, it's important as an organization to take a thought leadership stance and like, this is what we believe is the future. But then validating that as you grow and really listening and growing in a way that you provide immediate value is the challenge.
Yeah, there's a really interesting tension there, isn't there? There's the this is where I think, or our organization thinks the world is going in 5 to 10 years time, right? And that's a very proactive. And then there's also the very reactive human-centered design piece around what are the problems that are relevant to you today. And do you feel that there's tension between those two at all? Because they're in different directions, and it must be tough kind of shoehorning them together, right?
There's definitely big tension, and we can see that even internally on the team, where, for example, a customer wants a specific thing that would solve something right now today, and then how do you bring this into your product strategy that would fit into someone you have in mind for the next 1 year or 2 years to come, right? So it's always about striking a balance, and in that respect, I think that's also one of the most difficult parts on the product side, right? Like product strategy. And making sure that's like aligned with the vision of the organization, where it's going, and being to very eloquently explain this to potential customers when we're in the sales process. It's people don't necessarily buy what there is today. They buy into a vision, they buy into a team, and they buy into the future solution of this problem. Because the problem today is small in a lot of ways, but most teams, they will reuse data for the next project. They will hire more people. They will have more and more data as they grow. So essentially, it's also about how do we capture everything we're doing right now, and how do we leverage this 1 year, 5 years from now in the next iteration, when the next team members join, when we're going for the next investment round, someone wants to see what we actually build and wants to build on top of it. Or when we work with our suppliers, or we are suppliers to someone else, and we want to share a whole data stack or all our designs with them, right? So oftentimes bridging that also means that you're selling different parts of your vision to different people in different ways.
And actually, what I've just thought of is just the progression of Space Forge and how our narratives really shifted in the company. Because originally the idea was, we're going to make products in space, and then the gap kind of appeared of, ooh, there's not really a soft enough return process that will allow us to return materials, intact or safely. And so that's how our return system, so our heat shield and our little landing system kind of all came to be. And then it was the question of, it'd be really helpful to track our different experiments in space. And so that's how our little basically satellite tracker came to be. And so it's very kind of figuring out, speaking with people, figuring out what's missing. And I think that's been such a large part about Space Forge. I think ultimately, it sounds like Stefan and I, it's just all about kind of communicating and just making sure, the whole team is kind of on board with everything, but also just speaking with potential clients and stuff, and figuring out where the gaps are and just reacting to that. And it's ultimately, communication is just really at the heart of it all.
So you picked up something that I really wanted to draw on. We're in our last 10 minutes, and I know, Stefan, that you could probably talk for an hour on this topic alone. But there's obviously communicating externally, right? To investors, to customers, to government, whatever. But then there's also communicating internally, right? And whenever I think about communicating internally, that's about culture, right? And to what extent do you think, I just love to hear a little bit more around how you think about culture at Space Forge and Valispace, and how, is there any things you're doing to actively build it using the outreach methodology, toolkit, marketing, all of that kind of thing? Because I think there's such an interesting duality there around making sure that everyone on the team understands what's the story that we're telling, what's the message, what's the vision that we're all buying into. So I'm going to ask you, Christina, first, and then I'm going to come to you, Stefan, because I think you could take a while on this one, no doubt.
That's a really good question. And culture is something that's so important at Space Forge. And even from my first day, I just noticed, how focused everyone was, and making sure there was a good team culture. Everyone really was able to buy into the vision, and it was just a really open culture of communication. And so, initially when anyone starts, basically they get a lowdown on, they get the pitch deck essentially, and just kind of shown to them going, this is what we're doing. And then you just get the chance to ask as many questions as you want. And then anything that maybe can't be answered. Well, for me, it was Josh kind of, giving me the lowdown more on the business side. And then anything that he can't really answer, I'm passed on to Andy, and that's great. So Andy is just in charge of all the different engineering things at Space Forge. And so we do a few kind of things internally that you can't really see as just on the other side, just from our LinkedIn, but we have things, we have kind of meetings every 2 weeks. I have them with Josh and Andy, and I think most of the engineers have them with Andy and occasionally with Josh. And so that's basically just, you get half an hour, 45 minutes to basically just ask any questions you want about the company. And it's all very open. We also have the chance to kind of speak with each other without Josh and Andy present online, because our large, Space Forge really grew during the pandemic. And so we do a lot of hybrid working. For example, I'm in Edinburgh right now, and I do basically all my work from Edinburgh. So we have online coffee times where, all the team members from around the country just join in on a laptop, or if they're in the offices, we have big TVs kind of there with cameras that you can kind of join in there. And so, just really keeping open. And we have our internal website online where basically anything about Space Forge is really posted there, and we can all kind of learn from that, learn from each other. And then we also have really solid company values. And we have, initially when you join Space Forge when you're interviewing for Space Forge, we have a cultural interview, and that really stresses the importance of our values, and our questions are kind of around the different values there before you even go to a technical round of interviews. And so, there are lots of different things on all different fronts, and also just featuring our engineers on our social media, because I think a lot of the time, engineers are so busy behind the scenes, and we've found it really important to allow them to have a voice on our social media platforms. And they quite like, being like, oh, I've been interviewed, and it's all nicely done up and stuff. So we do quite a few different things, and culture is definitely at the heart of Space Forge. But I think I could keep speaking about this all day, so I'll pass it over to Stefan now.
I resonate with a lot of the points that you shared, Christina. I think in our case as well, the way we try and make sure that the internal communication works and that alignment exists is, first of all, we have, ever since we hired a head of people, which was a great choice, and I think a few months before that as well, we started designing new hiring and onboarding process. So making sure that people enter a culture which is clearly defined based on values. There's a clear process to like understand what the company does, how it operates, by which values, who it's for, who are the end users. Building the empathy as quickly as possible is really important. And then second of all, as soon as people join, having a way to involve them, even if it's not their area of expertise, but involve them and see different parts of organizations live. Having a chat, like I oftentimes have chats with people who are not on my team, just to make sure that people understand what's going on where in the organization, how. Especially our team is now looking at probably having a very clearly defined hybrid work structure because we have expanded a lot as well during the pandemic. We built quite a few good moments where people can get together virtually. That goes to like very similar to your coffee times. In our case, after work drinks, virtual breakfasts, online games. By the way, PowerPoint karaoke, if you've never tried it, it's a great one online. But going back to the point which you originally asked, Charlie, I think communicating and aligning internally is almost like a sales process in itself, and it needs repetition. And it's something we're currently actively thinking about how we can do this better as the number of people is growing, and as the, let's say, the functions and the functional areas in the organization are differentiating more and more. So it's definitely a challenge. And I think my favorite part of this is actually all our team buildings. For example, on last year's retreat, we did a three-day retreat here in Portugal, where everyone flew in who's not in Portugal. And one of the workshops that we suggested to do, and I actually asked some of our junior members on the team to do them, was how can we do a sales workshop for non-sales people? And then see how different people in the organization explain or sell Valispace to each other. And we gave everyone to play persona on the customer side and on the Valispace side. And it was just hilarious because we had like really funny scenarios. Like, you're explaining this to your grandma and you're an intern at Valispace. How do you do it? Or like, and it's interesting because at the end of the day, it's all about empathy for the mission of the organization, for different people inside the organization, and then the people outside the organization, how they would respond to us, right? It's all one big system. So yeah, as you said, Charlie, I have a million thoughts around culture, but we are making active efforts to improve at all times.
Amazing. Guys, I think we're going to have to call it, that's the end of the hour, but it's been really, really great chatting to you both. Some really interesting insights, especially, I think lots of different ways of approaching the same problem of building and scaling a startup, right? Any last nuggets of wisdom to share before we wrap up?
I have one.
Go on.
And it's something that is also going to be combined with an ask. Invest in people as quickly as you can, hire on time. That is my personal lesson of the last year and a half. I'm currently looking for quite a few people on my team. So if you know any performance marketeers, if you know any people with a technical background who love writing, or even marketing interns, these are types of roles I'm currently looking for. And the reason I'm saying this is one of my big nuggets is because I underestimated how quickly the work would scale and how long it takes to bring people on board. So
Amazing.
I definitely echo that sentiment as well. Yeah, make sure that you're bringing on people, at the right time who are engaged with the vision, which is why I really like our cultural interviews. I think they're really great and allow you to kind of, they can ask questions as well, the people we're interviewing. But also, just as someone, if you're starting out in marketing, just really understanding the why behind your business and getting everyone's different perspectives as well from the team. I think it's really useful to go around and see what everyone thinks, for us, what Space Forge is, what we're doing, why it's important. And then just like really understanding that and processing that will just lead to so much better, I think, conversations around your work and different opportunities there. So.
Phenomenal.
there we go.
Well, that's 1 o'clock on the dot. Thanks very much both for speaking with us. And I know we've got another lunch and learn in about a month's time, something like that. I'm sure there's it's been posted in the chat 17th of March. Fantastic. But I'll reach out to both of you. It'd be great to catch up again. And thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.